to, can I just raise something about yesterday?
I'm sorry, what?
Would we be able to just, would I be able to just bring something up about yesterday, the mapping in Ngaruahia?
Yes, let's start the meeting and then you can raise that. So this is a resumption of the deliberations of the hearing of submissions on the dog control and policy review. We have two apologies, one from Mayor Allen, one from Councillor Beck. I think everybody else is here, so could I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Thank you, Councillor Lynch. All in favour? Hands. Thank you. Carried. So as I mentioned yesterday, what we propose to do here is move into the policy, get that fine-tuned, then move into the bylaw armed with the knowledge that we've got on the policy and make sure that they both align. So I'm relying on the ears of staff to be making sure that you're picking up those connections. Councillor Patterson, you had a comment?
Yeah, it was just in regarding the banning of dogs in Jasmine Street in Ngaruahia, that red zone area. It affected the two towns, Huntly and Ngaruahia. We were sort of probably two sides of the coin yesterday discussing that. We did have a community board meeting last night, and it was raised again about some of the stuff that we've been doing and around that banning of it. And also, I feel
is the comment that you're going to make?
Yeah, can we?
Councillor Patterson.
Yes.
Is the comment that you're going to make the same comment that's encapsulated in the community board's submission?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So I just wanted to know, and just wanted to check with Tracy, if there has been any issues with dogs in that main street, because I'd followed up last night with a few businesses down there and they didn't see the problem. And the other thing is, we just started to feel like we're sort of social profiling our community, where from all accounts there hasn't been an issue in that town as far as we're aware, and some of the businesses aware for many years. I had a business down there myself for 13 years and never saw any issues. So I just wonder from Tracy if there has been any issues, because I feel as though we probably got it quite a bit wrong yesterday and we'd like to have that removed.
Tracy?
So off the top of my head, talking about issues down Jasmine Street, no aggression issues that I can remember. A number of stray wandering issues where dogs have been collected from the street, but no complaints that I know of. I would need to go and ask the other officers if they have dealt with any aggressive complaints in that area.
Okay, so I'm comfortable having this discussion because it's a point that was raised through the submission process and we discussed yesterday. Councillor Lynch, did you have a comment to make?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So can I ask, didn't you have an existing policy of no dogs on that street? Is that why you've had no problems?
Yeah, well, people still walk their dogs down through there, etc. But there is no problems, and I think really the community are very probably unaware that there is even that policy in existence.
Okay.
And I just feel as though I'm just starting to feel it's unnecessary. And look, we're working our butts off trying to change the profile of our community, and there's a lot of work happening in that area. And there could be more opportunities for cafes, eateries in that town. And by eliminating that, we're doing the exact opposite of what we're trying to do in other communities like Raglan, Tiko Whara and up north. So, something that happened was an issue 15, 20 years ago, which would probably be longer than that. It doesn't seem to be an issue now. So why are we still putting these rules into place?
Councillor Smith.
Yes, as Councillor Patterson was describing this, it reminded me of the scenarios. If there's no one in a forest and a tree falls down, is there any noise? So the parallel here is, because it's been banned and there hasn't been a problem, is there a problem? And so the reality for me is, and I agree with his sentiments in relation to changing the culture of Ngaruahia, and it needs to mature at some stage. And I think it's gone a long way towards that. You look at the attraction of the developments that have happened in and around Ngaruawahia and the growth of Ngaruawahia. So, yeah, I'm torn between, do you have the policy in place or the bylaw in place, and those who behave properly you ignore, and you deal with those who do not behave properly with the use of a legislative provision that you have. If you take it away, then you don't have it, and you cannot act unless it's acting menacingly or dangerously or whatever the provisions are. So torn between saying I support what Eugene and the community board is saying, but then if you take away a tool that's been useful and has worked and you create a problem, then you've got to go backwards again. So yeah.
You may not have been, you may have left earlier yesterday, Councillor Smith, when we were discussing this, and we were quite sympathetic to the community board's submission, and rely probably more on the local councillors for their local knowledge of it. Councillor Gibb.
I just say that I'm also local, but not the councillor. So, yeah.
Councillor Gibb.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, yes, Eugene and I have been mulling this over, and we basically think that, you know, just because the prohibition is there, people don't know about it. And if you recall, Mayor Allen yesterday started talking about the beaches and other places, people haven't got a clue what the rules are. And so he admitted they don't know what the rules are. So in this case, it's the same thing. They don't know what the rules are. And in all these years, we might have the odd wandering dog, but I believe it's actually not the dogs that are the nuisance. I believe it's people. So there must be another bylaw like public nuisance or something that we could use if it ever came up again. So, you know, I'm supporting what Eugene's saying, as I said yesterday. I am really concerned about how we're saying Ngaruawahia is different to Raglan and the people are different, and it does, whether it's perceived or real, it could be a perception that we are social profiling. And I just feel really uncomfortable with this. You know, there haven't been complaints. Tracy can't remember, or, you know, there being complaints. And I'm just wondering if we're putting our own personal view on things when we should be looking at what the community's saying, not us necessarily. Can't say much more, sorry.
No, thank you for that point. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding from the socioeconomic and mix of ethnicities in Ngaruawahia, Huntly and Tuakau, particularly, they're actually almost identical. And we've had and we listened last time to people who wanted to help educate our dog owners as well as the dogs by being able to have socialisation and walk them up to the dairy, pick up the newspaper, go to the cafe and do those sorts of things. And that actually encouraged the better behaviour and socialisation of the dogs in around Tuakau. My understanding, Tracy, is there hasn't been any particularly, that I'm aware of, any incidences of, you know, real intimidation going on in the Tuakau area. Is that correct?
Not that has come to my attention, but I would need to ask the local officers for their feeling in that respect.
Right, thank you. And also, I think I did ask a question of Tracy yesterday, that under the legislation, I think that's something I've learnt from all the submitters, is that there actually is other ways rather than just our bylaw for dog behaviour. And I see Tracy nodding her head that we have other protections, we have other mechanisms. I would, you know, I think one, as I said yesterday, I support listening clearly to our community board, because we rely on our community boards to be very close to the communities and the network. And I know that our councillors, you know, all of us are really close to our communities as well. So I think this is, you know, I think it's worth I think it's valuable to take on what they're saying. But my question, I guess, back to the councillors is, are you just talking about Jesmond Street, or are you taking it that'll be just an on-lead area like Te Kauwhata, Tuakau, Pokeno, and Raglan? Is that what you're in? Like, so that basically the urban area of Ngaruawahia would be all on-lead, under control, right? And that means not being left and all that those sort of things. Yeah. Right, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I think the councillors have raised a really good point this morning, and I, for one, am not comfortable making decisions based on what seems to be or could be perceived to be really subjective judgments of different communities. I also am happy to take the guidance of what the community board has said. And also what we've heard from Tracy this morning, there is no evidence that it causes a problem in those main streets. So I'm happy to support the councillors on this one and actually get that removed.
So just to be clear, we're talking purely about Ngaruawahia.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I mean, if we have evidence, I'm assuming we have heard about evidence in Huntly. I'm happy for that to remain, but if we've got no evidence of being problematic in other areas, I think we should revisit it. And as I say, we've heard from the community board in Ngaruawahia that it's not an issue, so I think we need to be making our decisions based on that evidence.
Thank you.
Are there any more speakers on that, Councillor Patterson?
No, I just thanks for the discussion, and are we happy to remove that?
So, so although we were going through not officially in moving the motions as we went yesterday, we were doing, if you like, a straw poll on them, so we were clear where we were. So you are proposing to recommend that Jesmond, is it Jesmond Street only, or is it the whole of Ngaruawahia?
The area that was mapped out in the red, which was banning of dogs. So it's Ngaruawahia and a bit of Great South Road.
And down Galileo Street as well from
no, I don't think, no, it wasn't Galileo, that was to do with earthquakes.
Just to the roundabout.
Yeah, it was all the red area, but as long as they stay on leash. Yeah.
As all dogs are in public places anyway. So you're happy to move that, and Councillor Gibb to second that as part of the bigger, right? Okay, and have a show of hands for in favour, please. Thank you, Councillor Smith. You're against, but you're neutral. I'm not sure because you're mute.
Oh, when you wish that for permanent. No, I'm not against, but I'm not for at this stage.
Okay. I don't even know if we have a category as neutral, but maybe that would be a helpful one to introduce. It's not an abstain either. Okay, so thank you. So that should give some direction on that one as to where we're going. Thanks, Councillor Patterson, for raising that. No, right. So as I mentioned before, we'd like to start on the dog control policy. That's on page 50 of your agenda. I mean, Hannah, do you want to give an overview of this? I think it's fairly self-explanatory, actually. And so I just propose that we work through it paragraph by paragraph as people or subhead by subhead. You happy with that?
Yes, I'll actually just ask Tracy to introduce the policy, if that's okay.
Sure.
Good morning. The change in policy that we have created as part of this policy and bylaw review was, our previous policy was a little thin on the ground, to be fair, and we wanted to create a more comprehensive policy that spoke to what council is required to provide as per the Dog Control Act.
That was probably a very short introduction. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got that. Okay, so now, Councillor Smith, I know you have a few things in here. I have a few things as well. And so what I just propose is The introduction, quite clear. If there's any comments, please jump in at the appropriate point. The objectives, equally, all those 4 points are quite clear. There are definitions.
Councillor Sedgwick.
Yes.
Councillor Eyre has
Councillor
it.
Eyre, sorry. Yes. Councillor
No,
Eyre.
just before you moved on from the objectives, just in reference to going back to Section 6 in the Dog Control Act, in respect of our functions, duties and powers of this policy, adopting a policy, I see we are really omitting, which is Section 6, subsection 2B, the ability to actually make grants. And I'm just trying the devil's advocate here. We seem to have completely overlooked that.
No, we have just chosen not to do it. But it is, you're right, it is part of the Dog Control Act. Sarah, do you have any, or Kirsty, do you have any comment on that?
Just to say it's entirely discretionary. It says we may grant if we haven't. I don't know that it's anything that has been considered, and I guess I would urge caution in light of, from a financial perspective, that has not been considered as an organisation policy. So if it's something that we want to consider, then I think we would need to go through the right channels to do so.
And
I understand. I do understand that from a financial perspective. I am somewhat disappointed it didn't come up in our discussions, because at a more of a workshop level, even if it was included, doesn't mean to say that at this point in time we can't fulfil. But to my mind, it goes a long way to incentivizing good dog control behaviour and good ownership. So yeah, just as I say, whether it rolls over to the next review or what, I'm playing somewhat of the devil's advocate here, but I do see it being somewhat of a gap.
I understand what you're saying, and that is a point that anybody who's looked at the Act will have seen. In realistic terms, it's not in our LTP. There's no ability to make those grants, and
no submissions, Madam Chair.
Pardon?
No submissions asking for it.
That's correct, but this is our policy, so we own the policy.
Yeah.
Kirsty.
I just wanted to also point out that although it is our policy and we do own it, if you read through section 10, I think, where it talks about the adoption of this policy. So this policy has to be adopted in accordance with section 83, and any amendments that we make to this policy also have to go through the section 83 process. So it's probably worth me pointing out at the start of this that I'm not sure how many changes we can make to this policy on the basis that what has already gone out under section 83 is what has been consulted on. And if we're going to make significant changes to it, we're running the risk of it not being what we went out and consulted with and falling into the realms of an amended policy, which would then require re-notification under section 83. There's no option for an amended policy to go out under section 82. It has to go out under the special consultative procedure.
I do understand that and appreciate that. Maybe when we consider the review, when we go and undertake the review in future, if we make sure that it's in its entirety, including that, even if we have a discussion to omit. I guess it was, to my end, the failure to discuss from the outset. Just a comment.
Absolutely, and I'm just saying that generally, I know that there is an appetite within councillors to make some changes to the policy, and I just wanted at the outset to say we need to be very careful at what changes we are making and to ensure that we're not amending it to the point where it's not what went out for consultation.
No, that's absolutely understood, and many of them are the meanings of words and whether it's a shall or a will, those sorts of things. So we've come down then to the definition of dogs, which has a change in it that you'll see there. And I've just actually got a question for you, Ms. Ridling, and that is a cat kept as a domestic pet?
Yes, it is. Generally, I mean, if it's kept as a pet, then yes, it is a domestic pet. You can have feral cats that aren't domestic pets, but if a cat lives in a house and is fed, then yes, it would fit the bill as a domestic pet. And
yet they fall outside the law pretty much, it seems. So essentially a domestic animal is the domestic, yeah, it's a cat. Councillor Henderson.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I found reading the submissions that it was interesting. They listed what were considered domestic animals, and that on average there are 2.4 horses kept as domestic animals in every household in the Waikato.
I haven't got my allocation. Right. Right. So, yeah, we are talking dogs and we're not talking cats. So over the page on 51, where we talk about nuisance, my question, Ms. Ridling, is the piece that has been added, which has or been amended, taken from the Health Act. My understanding is that that addition relates to buildings or premises, annoying, harmful, offensive.
Not,
or is it? Am I misreading?
It's a general nuisance. So if you look at the Health Act has a significant definition of what is nuisance, and it is not limited to buildings or anything like that. For example, an example of nuisance that has been established through case law as being a nuisance is bird droppings. So that's an example of nuisance that isn't particularly applicable to a building. So it is a very general, if you look at the Health Act definition of nuisance, it is massive, and it's very broad and very inclusive, let's put it that way. So it's often easier to just have a definition of nuisance as being that as what is in the Health Act, because that is also being determined by the courts as to whether or not it's nuisance.
Good, thank you. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question is on that first page 50 of the disability dogs, assist dogs, and I know we've cut out the information on there as to what the definition is, and referring people to a section of the Dog Act, which of course they can Google and then look up again, but the basics of it I think would be still helpful if someone was wanting to look at our policy and just read it and get an idea of it, rather than then having to be sent completely to another place. So I wondered why we'd just taken out the basic definition of that.
I have a feeling it's mentioned elsewhere, I think, in the bylaw.
That's part of our definitions, it's part of the beginning and of the policy, which is a normal place to put those interpretations.
If Councillor Church, if you look at page 55, you'll see the under F, it's listed out the disability assist dogs. Yeah,
but generally in terms of the way that an act or policy is done, the definitions are done at the front, so then it's like the top of the line thing. So I'm just asking why it was taken out. The other definitions haven't changed, and they're given the classifications and examples. So I'm just, why particularly that one?
Ms. Ridling.
Generally, you would revert to just the section. So you would say the same meaning as a section, and that's to make sure that if the legislation is amended in any way, it's encapsulated in that. If the legislation, for example, if the legislation is amended and the sort of basic description we have in our definition is still there, but is taken out of the legislation, then you're running the risk of it being inconsistent, although you would revert to the legislation as being the primary document. It's just to ensure consistency with the definitions within the legislation.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of more of the people that use that are going to look at our policy and helping them to be with that transparency of information. We're just sending them somewhere else. Yeah, I think.
So Councillor Church, just to answer that, there's the way I'm seeing this, it's brevity at the front. If you want to know more, you go to the definition further on in the document. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, but I think Hannah was before me.
Oh,
She's got
sorry.
her hand up.
Sorry, Hannah.
That's okay. Just wanted to add, yeah, the reason why this was amended was to align with the definition within the bylaw. There's no like substantive difference by referring to just the section in the Act, and a number of the definitions within the policy already just refer to other definitions within other legislation. So it's not unusual in terms of how it's been drafted to date.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, no problem with it. Councillor Eyre.
Just my quick question, is anybody able to answer whether the dogs that are, I don't know if they're specifically trained or not now, that assist with children, people, individuals that are on an autism spectrum, are they included under the definition of assistance dogs?
If you turn to page 55, it has them all listed, which are about 7 different categories. It answers your question.
Yes, but are those dogs that are trained for?
It answers your question. New Zealand epilepsy. It's please turn to 55 if you want to know more about that. It's fully answered. Right. So we are back to. Sorry, we've moved through those definitions.
Apologies, Madam Chair, if I could just interrupt. Sorry. The other thing is that page 55 does go through it. So Schedule 5 of the Act also sets out everything that is included in terms of assistance dogs. If it's in that Schedule 5, then it will be included as an assistance dog within our policy, purely by virtue of the default being, if it's under Schedule 5, it's included in our policy.
Thank you. Right, so I think we're now moving on to page 52 and the obligations of council. And I have a question, no doubt there are others, but that is where we talk about supporting dog owners and the welfare of dogs in that first sentence. Are we comfortable with the word will, which is instead of may or shall? Ms. Ridling?
Shall has the same meaning as will.
Oh.
Both requires you to.
Sorry,
May is a discretion. One thing we need to bear in mind with that is what our duties are under the Section 10 in terms of what is required in our policy.
Do you mean what is required under the Territorial
Under the Dog
Authority?
Control Act, yes.
So I'm not aware that we are required to provide designated exercise areas under that Act.
We're required to identify those. These are, Tracy can probably talk more to this than I can, but these are things that we have identified as I want to call us the Dog Control Authority, the Territorial Authority, that are things that we will do. Although they may not be required from a legal perspective, these are things that we have identified as things that we as the organisation feel are our requirements. They may not be what another territorial authority.
So it's not specifically an obligation.
Yes, it is, Madam Chair. Section 10(3)(e) of the Dog Control Act. Duty of territorial authorities to adopt policy. Every policy adopted under this section shall identify any places within areas or parts of the district specified in paragraph C2 of the subsection that are to be designated by a bylaw under section 21D of the dog exercise areas in which the dogs may be exercised at large.
Right.
So that's the
Okay.
obligation is to identify. The obligation isn't to provide.
So why?
Well, if you identify, you're talking about providing, in my view.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if you choose to have them, you have to identify them. But in any event, we have as an organisation, and like I say, Tracy can probably talk to this more than me, we have as an organisation identified something that is something that we will provide.
I'm not arguing against it. I'm trying to. I'm not arguing against it. I'm trying to make sure that we have the clarity that is correct, and if it's identify or if it's provide is really my question on that.
To my mind, the requirement is to identify, because it clearly states identify. There is no requirement to provide, but we have identified internally, and this is our internal policy, that the provision is something that we will do.
Okay. Okay.
Madam Chair, I think it just raised a point of order, and it's not for me to argue with lawyers normally, but however, it says shall identify any places within areas or parts of the district specified in paragraph C2 above, and that are to be designated, which are bylaw, blah, 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 which dogs may be exercised at large. So it's identifying where dogs can be exercised at large. It's semantics as to whether we're providing them or not. We're identifying where they can, and therefore there's an inherent implication that it can happen. And so we must. I don't know whether we want to argue the point for all day, but
no, I don't want to belabor the point all day. I want to be clear that we are following exactly what we are supposed to do, and as Ms. Ridling says, with an internal with the WDC policy to provide, but I'm still of the opinion of identify, but I'm happy with provide. Ms. Ridling, do you have a comment to make?
Just to clarify, so subsection 4D requires us to having regard to the exercise and recreational needs. Correct. So long as we've thought about it and we've decided that that's what we're going to do, I mean, obviously it depends on whether or not you can do that. There might be places where you can't provide exercise or recreational needs, but within our organisation, we've identified that that's something we've had regard to, we can provide it, therefore we have determined that we will provide it. That's why we've got the will in the policy.
And that's a great position to land. Thank you. So under responsibilities of dog owners, there are no suggested changes, and nor under under control of dogs in outdoor spaces. Stephen, you've got a comment that you want to include that this does not apply to Huntly. So Narawa here is except so you'll need to alter schedule 1.
Yeah, so that's under 3.2 dogs and outdoor dining establishments. So within the current policy, dogs are prohibited in Ngaruawahia and Huntly, though that will change for Ngaruawahia as discussed earlier. This change was suggested to make it clear that dogs are allowed in outdoor dining establishments with exception to Huntly, essentially, which is outlined in Schedule 1.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. And then further on into exercising at night, registration of dogs is purely a reflection of current practice. And then we come to the dog registration classifications. Councillor Smith, I thought you had a comment on that somewhere.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. If you look at the document, there are 7 classifications of dogs. There are 2 further classifications which come under section 5(2), probationary dog owners, and 5(3), disqualified dog owners. I think those 2 classifications need to be closer together so that people understand that there's actually 9 classifications of dog owners. If you look at now the approved dog owner and the general dog owner, there's only 1 line difference between the two. To my way of thinking, we've got far too many classifications, and it just seems to be, and I'm assuming in the past, someone's tried to deal with a scenario, so they just added another line on another category, in my view. And we had a long discussion about dogs in rural areas. Farm owner, so it's a person who lives on a farm and farms that property of at least 20 hectares or more, and so there are, what I'm suggesting is that we've got too many definitions and categories, and whilst we can't wholesale change them now, had I actually given due attention to this subject before the hearing, I probably would have asked for this to be completely reviewed. I'm really signalling that I think we've got a minefield here that needs to be made more clear, and to have that many ownership categories is too complex. So this is probably for a review, which I think should take, instead of, I know policies are about every 3 to 5 years, but bylaws now only need to be changed every 10 years after doing this one. So the reality is this policy needs a good thrashing, in my view. And when you've got approved owner and general owner with only 1 line difference, and that basically any other matter, unable to provide evidence of a dog previously registered or kept unregistered at another local authority. To me, that's a waste of time. It should just still be approved owner. Approved in general should be the one. Anyway, I've had my say on that one. I've got more to say on others, but I just think that the number of classification is far too many. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Church.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, Councillor Smith, I guess I would probably use your own words that there is a lot of classifications. I don't recall, though, any submissions to say, hey, it's too complex and we just want one, or and we really have a lot of concerns from any of the submissions. It could have been some I missed, of any of the issues around that. What I see in them, and also obviously from staff who've reviewed it, so I guess a question to make sure that we're on the right track for noting it for the future is whether there's been an issue around any of these fee structures that we need to flag for the future. Personally, I sort of see that as part of that engagement, education and enforcement, where it might be steps that seem baby steps, but it seems to be an encouraging step based on their registration to encourage dog owners and good fencing and things like that. So I guess the question is, was there any submissions around that, many around the complexities, 1, and 2, have the staff found that there's too many categories for the registrations?
So let me go to Tracy first and then to Councillor Eyre.
If I could talk to these categories from an operational perspective, the general dog owner is a dog owner that's committed an offence and we charge a higher registration for. An approved owner is the standard dog owner category that any dog owner that we don't have any history with or hasn't applied for a selected owner policy pays the standard registration. A selected owner policy is a dog owner that has 2 years of clean history, gets property inspection and receives a cheaper registration, very similar and the same price to the farm owner policy registration with just a slightly different property visit. The dangerous dog category is one that's listed via the Act that we must do if we classify a dog as dangerous. Disability assist relates to fees. We give them a free registration, and neutered or spayed relates to getting 1 year's free registration for a dog being neutered or spayed to try and promote that responsible step as a dog owner.
Thank you. Thank you. That is very clear. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I agree with Councillor Smith's commentary that there does seem to be too many owners. Just in respect, my first 2 points, but my first question, as a selected owner, how many of those property inspections are being done or able to be done within your capabilities, Tracy? Like, is it realistic if somebody applies for that status for you to be able to get out and do the inspection? Is that problematic?
Absolutely not. So currently we have a 5-day turnaround on selected owner policies. We usually get a rush of them in the couple of months before the new registration period, but the front of house is very good at letting people know that they can apply for that selected owner policy to get that cheaper rate, because it is substantially cheaper. It's $20 to apply for that property visit, and they get $30 off their registration every year they're on, and so it's
okay. That's great. Just also in respect of when we're talking about farm owners, in light of our PDP, we're talking about our new rules in rural zone that you're not able to subdivide anything less than 40 hectares. Should that be aligned with, we're talking 20 hectares for consistency's sake? Should we be changing that to farm owner of 40 hectares rather than 20?
I can.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Ms. Riddling. Yes.
No, that's all right. If I can just provide some assistance. So it's not just this policy or this dog control bylaw that is affected by the changes under the PDP. So what we have, staff have had this conversation, and what we have sort of determined is that because the PDP provisions are not yet settled, we still have to go through the appeal period. We still haven't determined which provisions of the PDP are operative. There are a number of appeals in relation to that subdivision generally. So what we feel would be a more efficient use would be to, once the PDP provisions have been settled, we know what's operative, we know what's in, we know what's out, then we revisit the bylaws as necessary, or whether we need to do it as a package deal, so to speak, and to ensure that the bylaws are all consistent with the PDP.
Okay, I understand that. So in light of that, and trying not to give ourselves additional work, do we actually need to specify any farm size? If we're in a rural zone and we're saying that we're not limiting dogs on those rural properties now, why do you need to have 20 hectares to actually be defined as a farm owner if you're in a rural zone? Could we omit that 20 hectares altogether? And just have a rural dog who lives on a farm in a rural zone?
I guess the question becomes, how would you determine what a farm is? Councillor Smith wants to say something.
Councillor Smith is aching to say something, so please do.
Yeah, I think the alignment with the district plan is nonsense. We've said, and most people would say an economic unit is a farm is probably 100 hectares or more. But the reality is there are some very high producing hydroponic outfits on 4 hectares. And that's an agricultural property that they would say they're growing crops, and so to align it to the 20 and 40 hectares of the district plan is an absolute nonsense. If someone is and under 20 hectares, it's probably not farming per se, as we have a historical context, but the modern way, the intensification. So I think we just forget about the alignment with the 20 and the 40, and we don't start getting back into that argument about 2 dogs or 100 dogs in the rural area. Let's not go there and make it complex.
So you're suggesting, sorry, Madam Chair.
The other issue, if I can finish, there were no submissions on it, and it would be ultra vires to even go near it.
I think we move on from there, leaving it as it is. Thank you. And there are no, I may have jumped ahead of myself, and forgive me if I have, but there's no changes to the dangerous, the disability, or the neutered and spayed dogs. But there are, in terms of the dog registration fees, that is purely, I think, by way of clarification. The transferring of dogs between districts, there's I don't believe there's anything there. The refund that down on the bottom of page 56, there's an addition there on the where the dog owner has 3 or more dog-related offences. So we need to specify the period of that, which the suggestion is that it's 24 months. Councillor Smith, is your hand up or just accidentally up?
The reality is, I do want it to be up, but I had actually left it up. So the issue of when dogs die, and I think you touched on it a moment ago, and if I didn't, I misheard you. So if a dog dies, as Alice did, and I notified the council, I assumed that a credit for the balance would flow. And the policy of the council is such that you may notify a dog death, but unless you ask for the credit, you don't get it. And I would have been happy for that to have been applied to the next year. Maybe too much administration, but I think council needs to be a little bit more empathetic with some of our sensitive dog owners, because I didn't worry about it. That if they advise a dog's died, that we are a bit more proactive in responding to credits. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
It also opens up the question of whether you get a dog in May and then register it, and whether I understand you don't just pay for May, June, and start again in July. You back pay for the whole year, which seems to me a rather unusual situation. I can't think of anything else where you would do that. Car registration, you wouldn't back pay the whole year if it's currently. Anyway.
If you hand in the plates, you do get a credit. So bad example, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry?
Bad example, because if you hand in the registration plates, you do get a refund.
Right. Yeah. Perhaps it's not the analogy I'm necessarily looking for, but the concept that I'm looking for. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Was I understanding that correctly, that you're under the belief that you pay for a full year even if you've registered halfway through the year? Purchased a dog and halfway through the year? Because I found when I got my puppy, I only paid from when she was 3 months onwards, which was 6 months fees rather than full 12 months.
Tracy, do you want to answer that?
Councillor Henderson, you're correct. So if somebody comes to us with a puppy, then they pay pro rata rates, depending on when the puppy was born and how many months are left in that registration year. However, if you have a dog over a year old that is classed as an adult dog, that the registration should have been paid for, then if you come to the council with the dog in, say, December, you still need to pay for 12 months registration.
Is that assuming that it hasn't been registered before?
So we will look for registration on the National Dog Database if the owner has any details about where the dog has come from. If they have no details and can't provide that information, then they will be required to pay a full year's registration. If the dog is registered in another council, then there's no cost for registration. It's just a tag swap. So we will issue a tag if we can prove that registration in another council.
Okay. I'm wondering about rescue dogs. People take on rescue dogs with the and other dogs, but take on rescue dogs with the greatest will and intention, and I would imagine many of them might not know what the origin origin is. I just raise it. I'm interested in any conversation about it, but we clearly don't cover that specifically. Councillor Church.
Yes, Madam Chair, you took the words out of my mouth, and I think those are quite good things that we can pack. You know, some of these things are kind of seem to be more process rather than actually what we've done here. So I think it's valuable that we note some of these other process issues and look through for discussions in a workshop later on. But just to kind of be all clear about those things and maybe opportunities to improve the processes that underpin what we were trying to go through today.
Tracy?
Just one more thing I'd like to add is that often in that rescue dog situation, we're able to use that 1 year free registration from DCC, which makes it a lot easier for people that are taking on a rescue dog.
Yeah, understand that. Thank you for that. Is there any comment on section 5 under managing the troublesome dog owners and their dogs? I'm sure it's troublesome dogs and their owners. The period suggested is 24 months. Is everybody happy with that period of time? Appears so. Oh, Councillor Maguire, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, does that look after these? Tracy will know the place on Tawhai Road I'm talking about. Have we covered that situation in this new policy?
Tracy, I don't know if you want to get into specifics online. I think that probably
no, just those in general. It can't be with the present policy. We can't do anything about it. So, and there's complaints coming in all the time. So I'm just wondering. Yeah.
So
anyway.
Sorry, Tracy, do you have an answer? But I don't want to get into specific house or issue specific problems, please.
The policy gives effect to the bylaw, and the bylaw is where we take enforcement action on nuisance complaints. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's wise. So sorry, so my question was, and it appears that there's everybody's in agreement that 24 months is the time frame that you want to have on that. That's the suggestion from staff. We're now down to disqualified dogs and menacing dogs, and those are purely word changes. Dangerous dogs and impounded dogs. So if you look under impounded dogs 5.6 on page 58, there is a suggested addition there, and that reflects the current practice. Is there any comment in that, or are we able to move on? No. So moving on page 59. There are no suggestions, but sorry, Councillor Church, I didn't see you there.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I'll just put my hand up quickly. By the time you get your cursor across to the mic, just now I'm going to find it again. Just on that page 58, halfway down, I agree with what we've done. So it's just the animal control team runs very successful rehoming, except for dogs being impounded for aggressive behaviour. Any dog that are impounded and are not uplifted are extensively temperament tested, and then I guess can be rehomed. But there's actually no timing around that. So, and I'm not sure if that's a significant Kirsty change, but I don't know if we've got a process that we decide it's not picked up in a month or 3 months, and therefore it's deemed to be left, and therefore that we can rehome it, or what the time frame of that is.
In terms of dogs that have been, well, dogs generally have been, and Tracy can probably speak to this more than me, but my understanding is dogs generally are impounded because of bad behaviour or roaming or things like that. If it's because of bad behaviour, then we're only impounding it as a last resort, and generally they are usually subject to some kind of other enforcement action anyway. But Tracy can probably talk to this more than me.
Thank you. And I think the point Councillor Church is making is how long are they left in the pound when it's clear nobody's picking them up?
Or yeah, exactly. Thank you. And the potential owner that may not afford the registration, the fees to pick it up. There's what's the parameters around that?
So Tracy, do you have some comment on that?
So legally, we're required to hold dogs for 7 days, and we generally hold them for 8 or 9 to give people a chance to come forward and claim their dogs. People that have a lack of funds, as long as they contact us, we can work with them within our operational parameters. If we are sending a notice of impound, then we'll definitely hold the dog for 8 days following the notice of impound being posted to ensure the dog owner has a chance to claim it. Okay, so short answer is it's covered under legislation as to the minimum amount of time. That's good. Just want to make sure because it's not here. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're up. Where you're talking, sorry, on page 59, and where you're talking about education and training, I think this does not come under the policy, but would come under what we may bring up in future workshops in terms of whether the council would consider running its own education and training programs. And I'm thinking of Auckland City, who do this, and the benefit is that you reach a lot of people, but it enables you to be able to have some impact on the dog fees as well. So that's not something for this policy, but I think it's something that I'd like to pursue as part of our ongoing thinking about dogs. Page 60, there are no changes, but on 61, we have removed cemeteries because we are putting that out to the cemetery bylaw. Councillor Eyre, you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry just to have to look back, but just on page 58, section 5.7, issuing of infringement notices. Now, infringement as set out in Schedule 1 of the Act, that is a very, very broad and wide-ranging schedule. As a matter of interest, do we include that as an attachment on this policy? Because we can't assume that people are going to be cross-referencing and going to the Act. I just think it needs to be really, really transparent about what we can infringe for. And when we were including prohibited areas where dogs aren't allowed, and we're saying that we can infringe with, as I say, a lot of scope, but we're not actually, we're referring to the
answer. I think Ms. Ridling has the answer for you.
I don't know whether I have the answer per se.
Yes, of course you do.
I think the problem with that is, and this is kind of goes back to what we said before, if we attach pieces of legislation to a policy, that legislation may change. As you say, that schedule is quite big. So this policy, for example, when we consult on it, we have to send a copy of this policy out to all of our dog owners. So I think just from a practicality perspective, and Tracy might want to jump in here too, if she doesn't, but from a practicality perspective, we don't generally tend to attach pieces of legislation for various reasons, one being that if the legislation changes, we then have to continually change the attachments to make sure that they're all up to date. So.
Which we discussed yesterday. Thank you. Yeah. Tracy, do you have anything to add to that, or are you comfortable with that? Comfortable with that? Yeah, thank you, Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, you talked about cemeteries, so just flagging page 62, because we went over the Alexandra Redoubt exercise area, and that shouldn't therefore be crossed out because it's actually historic redoubt, as with the cemetery part of the historic redoubt. And then we were just going back to page 88, the map where the free exercise dog, which is a baited area, remember the redoubt's baited as well as the bush, and so that should be left there because there's actually.
So yes, you have jumped ahead a little bit, but we can do that. But I was planning to start on page 61. So the staff have got they've got all the discussions from yesterday. So those will need to be tidied up, Hannah, yes, including Ngaruawahia. So each of those we will be going through and making those align with what we discussed yesterday.
Right, which includes that. Thank you.
Which was your, perfect. And that's the dog exercise areas. I'm not sure how you're going to be phrasing, but you'll have it from yesterday, Hannah, on the Bob Byrne Park. How we worked out how we were going to phrase that, and what we're expecting to happen here is that you will go through each of these dog exercise areas and align them with the discussion of yesterday, particularly Whata and Te Kowhai. Okay. Please, everybody, I know Hannah will do it perfectly, but just check this when it comes out to the council for adoption, and please check your own areas so that you're absolutely spot on with them. That the maps will obviously need to align with the maps as we discussed them yesterday, so we've done that. And I think, is that the end of the policy part of it? I'm scrolling to, so that's the end of the policy part. Yes, Hannah?
Yes, I just have one question. I just want to be 100% sure for Whata and Te Kowhai Reserve. So my understanding is the decision made yesterday was that the sport field surfaces would be prohibited, so mapped accordingly, and then dogs would be permitted on lead on the periphery, not as a dog exercise area. Is that correct?
That's my understanding of it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wondering regarding the Wangaratta domain, because that's now been removed.
No, it hasn't been removed. It's been put in.
Line through it. On page 64, it's got a line through it.
Oh, it needs no. But our discussion yesterday, it's included. That was an old.
Okay, thank you.
Probably. So the last part, or the second to last part of this that we need to do is to work through the bylaw, which shouldn't be an onerous task because that aligns with the policy. We've just spent quite a bit of time on the policy. So just before I start, are there any general points that you want to raise before we get into the bylaw itself? No, fine. Okay. So, Hannah, do you want to take us through the bylaw? I think just where you've got it in blue are where the changes are, and my understanding is those changes are now in line with the policy, correct?
So the changes in blue are the track changes that went out for comparing the amended version that went out for consultation and the current version we have. So it's a little bit different to the policy, which was a new policy. The changes that have been made since post hearings are the ones highlighted in yellow and which have comments next to them. So I can go through all those changes listed in yellow.
Right. So I'm just going to suggest that people, that we just go through that page by page. So that's 35. Again, they're the definitions. Again, they're the definition of nuisance, which we've just seen, of owner, which we've just seen, and a number of elements talking about public places, again, which we've seen. My question on page 37, you've added loud simply to be in line with the Act. Is that's correct? That's my understanding. That's correct. Yes. Okay. And there's a proposal to add under 4. I've forgotten my points here, but it is under the Animal Control Officer, point D, and that's adding in the word reasonable. Remembering that this bylaw is what enables animal control to do their job. So it's important that it's correct. On page 38, we don't have any specifications in terms of streets, so they're covered out. They're covered in the schedule. Do we have sorry, I'm just checking. Do we have playgrounds in there?
Yes, we do. That's under 6.3 B, permanently installed children's play equipment.
Yep, or on skate parks. Yep. Okay. And the dog exercise areas, those will need. Is that attached as a schedule, the specific areas, or are they attached within this bylaw?
Yes, that's attached as a schedule, so that will need to be amended.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Just, are there any comments at large on this? I'm up to where I'm up to is page 40, and one of the points that
Madam Chair, page 38. Sorry.
No, good.
So the changes on the page top of 38 and just 6.3 is it from the previous page. The change, I just want to make sure that the comment there, HB7, to allow for whare and tukawhai sports field as exercise areas as proposed. So can we ensure that that is modified, please?
Yeah, we can remove that comment unless otherwise specified in Schedule 1 to this bylaw, because that's no longer applicable.
Yeah.
Thank
Given
you.
the decisions around whare and tukawhai.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, everybody, please, double check this when it comes to, pardon me, to the council. The final one comes to the council. There's, with the best will in the world, there's sometimes things that fly past. I had a question, and I'm sorry, I've lost my question.
Page 40, Madam Chair, you were on.
I was on page 40, and I'm on 11.1, and that is where premises are authorised via boarding kennel or dog daycare. And we had a lot of submissions on rescue, animal rescue, fostering, that sort of thing. How do we cover that off?
So just one comment to make is that this is actually error highlighting that. I shouldn't have highlighted premises which are authorised to be boarding kennel or dog care centre, because that was actually included in the bylaw, which went out for consultation and is within the bylaw already. In terms of like fostering of dogs, like the submissions generally provided that comment in context of the rural permitting of dogs in rural zones. So by taking away that exclusion, that should generally deal with that issue.
Okay. Just as long as we've listened to that one.
Madam Chair, listening to that one, the issue is just because someone's soft-hearted, kind, and judiciously caring about dogs doesn't mean to say that they are necessarily a great rescue centre in themselves with all the right facilities. We've seen people who rescue cats, who have hundreds of cats, and they're absolutely diabolical. So they still need to be subjected to everything else that makes them safe with welfare. So I just make that comment without needing to change anything. Because you're an owner, and just because a farmer's a farmer doesn't mean to say every farmer looks after their animals. So same as, rescue people.
I think there's a I understand what your point you're making, and there are regularized or registered animal rescues. That is also people who take in one or two as a foster and just get them, and I'm thinking of the greyhounds as pets, where they take in maybe one dog or two dogs and get them rehabilitated into a home environment. So they may not be registered with greyhounds as pet, well, they probably are, but that, you know, it's not a rescue as such. So I just want to make sure that we are flexible in that area. Point 12, keeping of more than 2 dogs. Now we're absolutely clear that we've got that correct there. And the appeal process, we have, that's now included, pardon me, that's now included within the bylaw, and that's spelled out quite clearly. Councillor Smith, did you have any comment to make on that appeal process? I think it's pretty much the process that we follow anyway. That's on page 40 at the bottom. The next change, page 41, again are changes for the Act, the dogs on vehicles, ditto, and offences and penalties are the same. And then finally we come down to the general. So just to be clear, we need to make sure that the bylaw is in alignment with the policy which we've just discussed. So is there any area of unease or confusion, Hannah, that we need to look at, or are you comfortable with where we've landed? See, Councillor Smith has his hand up, so maybe think about that and until he's possibly thrown another curveball into your arena.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I missed this bit with the appeals, but the subcommittee, it says 12.7 shall be referred to a subcommittee committee of the Chair of Council's Regulatory Committee or their deputy, Chair of Council's Policy and Regulatory Committee, and the Mayor, who shall consider the objection. The reality is we've got a committee of 4, of which we use 3, and the Mayor has no sight in that whatsoever. So the reality, it's the regulatory chairperson and 2 of the panel appointed for this role. And sometimes the chair of policy and regulatory is not available. So I think it should reflect what we're actually doing. That is the chair of regulatory or their deputy and any 2 of the panel that's appointed. We may appoint 5 to the panel next time, or the ensuring council. I won't be there, but yeah.
We may appoint more, but the regulatory committee is a subcommittee of policy, and so therefore I would suggest that you retain that you have the chair of policy and regulatory, simply as an oversight to that, whether or not they are included in the hearings. But we have noted that we sometimes can be short on the ground with people.
And there's conflicts and so on. So
conflicts, yes. So thank you.
Yeah, I think, okay, the regulatory chair, the policy and regulatory chair, and so a total of 3 from the panel appointed to hear these matters, because yeah, and it could be the alternates, the deputies of either of those 2 chairs. So this wording needs to be played with, please.
So your suggested wording, just to be clear on this. Oh, sorry, Kirsty, why don't you go now?
Apologies, I'm struggling with my unmute. I wonder if we don't put in what the subcommittee consists of.
Well, yeah, just the subcommittee.
Correct.
And that's a good idea, because the subcommittee would be appointed by the 2 those roles and whatever. So I agree with you, Kirsten.
And it may be the case, for example, that the chair isn't available, so you would then have the acting chair, and it kind of, there's lots of variables, as you've pointed out, Councillor Smith, that could potentially scupper this subcommittee. So I think if we just make a reference to a subcommittee, then that subcommittee, whether we say as, as appointed by council, maybe a catch-all without having that detail which may catch us.
Yeah,
Look, I'm a great fan of Occam's razor. Let's go with the simpler the better.
Yep.
Thank you. So that is just a subcommittee appointed by council. Now back to you.
Madam Chair, can we just get clarity there though, because there's been debate whether it's 2 people or 3 people. I think from experience, I'd like to see a subcommittee, 3, a panel of 3 appointed from the subcommittee. Leave it to staff. Yeah.
Or you could just say of suitable quorum.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, entirely a matter for the councillors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
right. Are you finished, councillors? You are. Your hand's gone and you've disappeared. So Hannah, is that clear with you?
Yes.
Is there anything outstanding that is creating anything that we need to pay attention to that's not in alignment or that we may have overlooked?
No, I don't believe so. The key thing in my mind is making sure the Schedule 1 and both the bylaw and policy align exactly. So I'll just need to double check that. But I have no concerns around the policy and bylaw not aligning. Tracy, do you have any comments on that?
No comments from me.
Okay. Okay. So are there any other comments that anybody wishes to raise in relation to this before we move to the recommendations? Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've gone through and tried to do the synchronous thing as I can. We've discussed some of the things in the maps with the bylaw, which I presume that will be picked up by Hannah as well. I'm happy to go through those later to check that. But my question is really around, with the changes of clauses, from 2 to 3, 5 to 6, 6.1, I haven't checked those. And I'm thinking that it's above my pay grade, where just to double check between the bylaw and our policy that we've got, perhaps that staff input into making, just triple checking those clauses one by one, that probably already have. That's just I'm sure that's been done or being done, but if we wanted to have that synchronicity, I'd kind of like that assurance.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre. Is it
a yes or no?
It's something that Hannah will go through. And as we said, that will come, when that comes through to you in the council agenda, that's where you'll get your flow through on that, with your lens on that. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just a general question, and it was obviously raised in our submissions, and we briefly touched on it in hearings, but just for clarity, can I just have a response from staff around the issue raised of notifying our registered dog owners of these intended or proposed changes?
Thank you. Hannah, are you able to answer that for us, please?
Yes, sure. So every effort was made to contact the 15,000 dog owners we have in our database. Approximately 5,000 emails went out to those dog owners who elected to be contacted via email, and then another 10,000 letters which went out to those dog owners who had just provided addresses. A process went through to identify any bounce backs that might not have gone through, to resend those out. Any letters we got back, we either sent an email or rung them to advise them of the opportunity. So yes, from a staff perspective, every effort was made to contact every dog owner to advise them of the opportunity to provide feedback and comment on the policy and bylaw.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire.
We discussed a couple of areas in the Martingi area, and we didn't go any further ahead with them. and they're not on the maps, of course. So how will we be putting notices up there that they're not for dogs at all, or what? I was just the sports ground and the little park in Martingi Village itself. I'm just wondering how we're going to approach that going forward through our bylaw and what have you.
Well, that wasn't picked up in this bylaw. Are they if they're sports fields, then they would have the same status as other sports fields in which dogs are not allowed on the playing surfaces. So that would be standardized, which is the direction that we've gone to. I'm not sure what the other park is that you're talking about.
Just a small one within Martingi Village or Martingi Road, next to the school. So they were discussed initially, but had the same attitude as Councillor Smith in terms of dogs on sports grounds, but we haven't given any indication in terms of whether the dogs can be around them or not, or at the games.
Yes, we have. We have talked about dogs not being allowed on the playing surfaces, but being allowed on leads.
Yeah, but we've named all those particular areas within
Hannah, would you like to make a comment on that?
Yes, I can. So I do recall discussions around an area in Martingi that was originally proposed as a possible new dog exercise areas, which I think is what you're referring to, Councillor Maguire.
That's correct.
As a result of the discussions and the workshops, it was decided not to proceed with it, so just leave with it as is. So that particular area would just fall under as a current, just as a normal sports field. We don't go through and mark every sports field in the bylaw, so it would just fall under the normal rules in the bylaw, which is dogs are permitted on lead in all public places, but prohibited on sport field surfaces.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Church.
Yes, Madam Chair, just can I say something on page 43?
Sure.
And I know it's all been crossed out, and I know that we've picked up on page 42 just a general sentence encapsulating the offences and penalties under the Local Government Act or Dog Control Act. So my question is, I guess this really runs around D, E and F, where it's, or even E, C, D, E and F, where it's more about omission or actively obstructing an officer, those sorts of ideas. So I'm not 100% sure if those ideas are those concepts or provisions are picked up within Local Government Act and Dog Control Act, and that's why this has all been crossed out, because like a failure to comply or obstructing, being able to get onto a property, that sort of thing.
Kirsty or Tracy, your choice as to who goes first.
I'll elect for Tracy.
Kirsty may want to clarify some of what I say. The Dog Control Act deals very specifically with any dog owner or any person who hinders or obstructs an officer in the course of their duties, and we can infringe appropriately as per that section of the Act. We wouldn't infringe for that, or operationally we wouldn't infringe for that under the bylaw. Kirsty may want to add more.
Mute.
It's not working. It's really frustrating. I'm having to click it about 5 times. So just to add to what Tracy was saying, so the singular sentence that we put in there catches everything that we can do anyway. The Local Government Act provides that anyone who doesn't comply with any part of this bylaw technically has breached the bylaw. So I guess all of the sub-clauses that we had within there were actually unnecessary, because if you don't do what you're required to do under the bylaw, that's a breach of the Local Government Act. And then, as Tracy pointed out, the Dog Control Act has very specific actions that we can infringe for or take further enforcement action for. So the removal of those is really just to clarify we already have all of these powers under the Local Government Act and the Dog Control Act. And in some respects, having only particular things in a bylaw can sometimes confuse people, because they can say, well, that's not in the bylaw. So yeah, so it's sometimes less is more, I suppose, is the argument.
Yeah, and also the language is quite, it's not user friendly particularly either, you know, so yeah, I understand why I'm just checking. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I think now we're in a, Councillor Maguire, your hand's up. Is that by omission? Okay, thank you. We're now in a position to move on to page 6, which is a recommendation, and I'm going to pass it over to democracy, I think, just to run through that.
Through you, Madam Chair, there were some recommendations, and I'll share my screen so that you can see them.
For those of us who have to do squinting, can you make it just a wee bit larger, please? Oh, perfect. Wow. Yeah, oh, that's good. Thank you.
So it's just noting that the committee have provided the direction to staff on changes required. Notes that the recommended staff changes have been made, and notes that subject to the further amendments requested by the committee, that these will be updated and sent directly to council for adoption on the 11th of April.
Just my question there on point B, we, I think, have been in alignment with the changes, but I want to be sure that the further amendments do relate to amendments we've made to recommended staff changes. So in terms of maps, in terms of, you know, where staff have, the staff recommendation, for instance, to keep the Whakawhara and Te Kowhai sport fields, we amended that. So I want to be very clear that we have captured those, all those amendments that we've discussed have been captured. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm happy to move that. And
Madam Chair.
Yes.
It says notes that the recommended staff changes to the dog control recommended staff changes. I'm a bit concerned with that word. So those words, because we haven't adopted them all.
That's what I've just discussed, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, and that's why I want those words changed. Notes that the recommended changes have been considered. To me, so it's.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, we have considered the recommendations, and we are now making our own recommend. You know, we've deliberated, and we're now making formal recommendation to council. So it's to me that reads to those who were sensitive to what we were doing, and the submitters may say that we've only done what the staff wanted us to do, and that's clearly not what we've done. So thank you for understanding that, Kelly.
Does that cover it, Councillor Smith, that additional wording?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. It's been pedantic, but it just means it'll be easier.
No.
I'll happily second that, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, can I just check something, please, on attachment 1?
On attachment 1.
Sorry, yeah, because you're talking about attachment 2, 3, and 4 on B.
Yes.
The crossing out of council cemeteries, isn't that a change that we've made through deliberations? Yeah,
So I think it actually should have all of those attachments noted in there.
All attachments. Yeah, rather than just 2, 3. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the staff responses, councillor, will need to be updated.
Correct. And
So,
and also on page 46. So it should be all the attached.
Good point, well picked up.
Sorry, I just was trying to figure that one out. Can I just read C? I know you're, I just want to do that.
While you're doing that, Ms. Ridling, your comment?
If we're making reference to all of the attachments, I wonder whether it's worth just saying notes that the recommended staff changes to the dog control bylaw 2015 and policy have been considered, and remove the references to the attachments. If we have all of the attachments, then we probably don't need to specify the attachments.
And also I'd say the same would be for C as well, because you've got attachments in those, but you're specifying them. So again, it's just a policy whole, which includes its attachments.
Yeah, I actually think in regard to that C, councillor Church, that the attachment 1 should be added there, so that we are noting all of those attachments, because so that we are noting that the staff recommended the staff responses will be updated also for council to adopt.
Yeah.
I agree with that change.
So look, can I read it?
I'll get the proper wording for that attachment after.
So explain to me again why we, on the bylaw, we just put attachments, or a bylaw, but then in the policy, we're specifying each of the attachments. Or should we just go 1, 2, 3, and 4? So, because also they're clarifying that actually at the stage that we do agree with it when we go back to council, that we know there was only 4 attachments, because one of the notes in here is that at any time council can make a resolution. So we know that at the time there was 4 attachments, not 5, for example. So to me, you've got a policy in the bylaw, they should specify either all the attachments 1, 2, 3, 4, or leave them off. So
I'm happy with them left on, although I would like the area maps to be attachment 4.
Oh yes, you're quite correct. I picked that up before. So it's attachments 1 to 4 that are being referred to council. Attachment 5 that was with the report.
Yes.
Right. And same therefore for the bylaw as well. We've got 4 attachments when we decide this in our 2022, there's actually 4 attachments, 1, 2, 3, and 4.
That comes under the bylaw itself.
Yes.
The holistic one. Yeah.
Yes.
So under B, can we just have in there after dog control bylaw 215 and policy, including attachments?
Yes. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Because
well, including attachments is fine by me.
Including attachments is fine.
Yeah. And I think that covers all the concerns.
Thank you.
I'm happy with that, Madam Chair, if you're happy with them as
well. I'm happy with it. I don't want to keep going back and changing minuscule bits, but I think we've got it correct there, and thank you for your input. So we've got to move in a second. Galen, if you could please take your screen down, that would be helpful. So all in favour of that which you've just read, please raise your hands. And against, please raise your hands really highly because I can't see anybody against. Thank you. I declare that carried.
Hang on, Councillor Sedgwick. Councillor Lynch, have you got your hand up for a reason? No. There you go.
Okay, so that's carried. Thank you. And I really want to thank the staff who've worked on this, because this has been like, I was going to say herding cats, but probably the wrong analogy. It's probably like trying to catch those white butterflies that don't seem to ever want to be caught. Thank you very, very much. I've really appreciated it. And each member of the staff has added so much, and I don't think from the outside you would have seen quite how much late night emails and Sunday questions and all that sort of thing that's gone on to make this happen. This will now go to the council committee, a council meeting on the 11th. and the bylaw, I believe, if it didn't go to that, the bylaw would lapse on the 13th. So we're a fairly close run thing. Also, before I go to Ms. O'Gorman, thank you very much, everybody, for your input. It's always been said that these are the worst things to do, but actually I've found everybody to be helpful and wanting to do the right thing, and I think that's a credit to where we're trying to go as a council. So thank you, everybody, for making my job much easier. So you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I haven't sat through all of the deliberations and the hearings, only some of them. Sarah has been doing that on my behalf. But I've had nothing but really positive comments from the staff, Councillor Sedgwick, on your management and running of all of the hearings and the deliberations. And we really appreciate the time you've spent with us, giving us guidance and advice, and also the way you have managed these hearings. And thank you to all of the councillors for participating the way you have. It's been a long process, but I think hopefully we'll get a good outcome out of this. So just thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Smith?
Yeah, just a request, please. I know there's a little bit of work for staff to do here, and do appreciate what they've done. But is it possible to get the proposed report that will go to council a couple of days before the agenda is actually published and we receive it and it goes online, so that if there's anything that we pick up, rather than debating it in council, that we actually get 48 hours to actually go through it and pick it up, just to make it cleaner in the debating chamber, so to speak. I'm just thinking of the outwards looking in. So
you're happy to have that as a separate draft report ahead of time?
But like hopefully it's as close to final as possible. And we can give
I call it draft because it will be the same report that will be in the council agenda, but it will only become to you as a draft.
And if we can have 48 hours just to proof it and make sure that we are comfortable, and if there's any concerns, raise it either through you or direct to Hannah, whichever you decide.
Councillor Smith, is that request to all councillors?
No, well, yeah, I'm asking on behalf of all councillors, and the councillors have an obligation to do something with it within 48 hours. And if they haven't asked for changes, the inference is they shut up and let things happen on the day, including myself.
A chance would be a fine thing, Councillor Smith.
Absolutely. Wishful thinking. Thank you.
No. Thank you for your input, actually. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Councillor Smith on the opportunity just to double check. I just think that when we send in any possible changes, that's actually just on what's been deliberated and discussed, and that you're copied into them, just to ensure that no one has a, oops, I forgot to do something that we haven't already deliberated or hasn't been done in terms of the hearing. I'm sure that won't happen, but just for the transparency, we need to make sure that, it was supposed to be a T, not an L, or that was what we discussed in terms of now, that when we send that information back, that it's just checking those things we've already discussed and agreed in principle.
Correct. We're not looking to make any changes whatsoever. It's just ensuring that the clarification and the changes that we've made through this deliberation process is actually captured correctly. So
I just ask, would you mind, it's more work for you, but would you mind if we have to, then if we send it back to staff, that we send a copy to you?
Absolutely.
Are you agreeing on my behalf, Councillor Smith? Yes, thank you.
I'm thinking out loud again, sorry.
Yes, fine. Thank you, Councillor Church. Look, thank you, everybody. You've managed to get a whole day off tomorrow, so enjoy, and staff, make sure you go have a celebratory, possibly independent cup of tea. Thank you very much for your help. Thank you, everybody. The meeting is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you all. Awesome, Jen. Good job. Well done.